Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the final event of the week here at the QATC Virtual Summit. Today we're going to hear a great session on Walk a Mile in My Shoes. It's all about coaching for empathy. And I think this is like perfect timing for this because sitting on so many sessions this week at QATC, and Sharon, I know you've been out there too, and it's come up so many times about we were getting different kinds of calls. We were getting calls from people that are, they're upset, they're scared, they're financially insecure, and some of our reps are equipped and some not to really deal with that in an empathetic way. So I just think this is the perfect session and way to end the week is helping our participants know how to coach for that. Just a words of introduction and housekeeping before we get started. Most of you have been to at least one session this week, so you know what to do here, but I'm going to tell you anyway. First, you can find a handout of this session either in the app or at thevirtualsummit.com, so you're welcome to go out anytime and download that for yourself. And you'll also find the session evaluation, which I'll remind you again at the end of the session about that, also in the app. We're going to be using the chat feature to talk to each other today, and I think this is going to be a section that will bring up a lot of questions and comments. So please feel free to use that anytime you want. You don't have to hold questions until the end. So just to get your fingers all warmed up, why don't you go ahead and pull up that chat over on the right-hand side of your screen and send us in a message, just a hello to Sharon, and why don't you put how many sessions have you attended this week? I've looked at our attendee list, and I see some names that I see in every single session that I've posted. So I know folks are really making use of this, and that's fantastic. You know, people are saying they attend as many as they can. The other thing that we're really seeing is a lot of folks are accessing the recordings, and those are available the day after the sessions happen. You can go out and see any of these recordings. So I'm sure this is going to be one that you're going to want to share with your team if they're not all with you here today. All right, so you've got lots of chats coming in, and some people have 5 or 6 sessions. This is my 11th one.
9 sessions. Josephine, wow.
Yeah, good job. At least 6.
11th. Wow.
And,
this should be a prize.
We should have a prize for the most sessions. Actually, there will be a prize at the closing session for who is.
Okay, good.
So, all right. Well, with that, I'm going to turn things over to who you really came to hear, and that's Sharon Otway. She's President and Chief Experience Officer at VeriQuest, and she's going to be sharing her knowledge with us today. So, in addition, Sharon, if you want to share your screen.
I will.
She's going to be presenting with us today. Lots of experience, and I've had a look through these slides, and I think you guys are going to love this. So, Sharon, it's all yours now.
Okay, I'm just going to switch my screen here. Let me just see if I can do this correctly.
It looks good.
Okay. There we go. So, well, we're right at the very end of the presentation already. How about that? Let's just start this again.
Time flies when you're having fun, you know?
It does. There we go. Okay. So thank you for having me. I think the most important part of this whole week that I've been part of is that I'm meeting so many great people, and they have so many different ideas about how things work, and I'm always learning. So I think if we can continue to learn through this presentation, that would be a great thing. So let me just do a little bit of an introduction for myself. Like most of you, I didn't intend to be a call center person. In fact, I started out in technology sales, and a few years later, I ended up in banking. And it was in the late 80s, and I was asked to launch the first of 2 Canadian direct banks. And so that included direct mail, interactive response systems, as well as the call center. So I inherited the call center. And I didn't know very much about it. So I decided to spend half a day every week in the call center actually taking calls. And the supervisor there allowed me to sit on one of the really basic queues, so it was pretty straightforward. And I learned a lot about not only the job, which is very hard in case you haven't been on the phones recently, but I also learned a lot about consumer behavior. And in fact, I learned more about consumer behavior by listening to calls for those few hours a week that I would listen than I did in the many focus groups that we had initiated. So now we're going to fast forward a few years into the future, and in 2002, when I launched VeriQuest, I happened to be in an elevator of a temporary office facility here in Toronto, and I ran into the folks from Expedia, and they were just launching Expedia globally, and they asked me if I would be interested in listening in to their calls and to determine whether or not the agents were representing the Expedia brand well. And so, of course, I jumped at the opportunity, and that's when I really started to embrace the whole idea of leveraging quality assurance and call listening to really understand consumer behavior. Now, it was in about 2009 that we discovered in an analytical way that empathy mattered to customers. And we knew that it was important to be caring and concerned, but the whole idea of expressing empathy was really not on our radar at the time. And so we started working through that, and we've never had more conversations about empathy over the last 10 years than we've had in this last 3 months or whatever. And, of course, we all know why that is. And it has to do with COVID. Now, COVID's not only disrupted our lives and the lives of our employees, but also the lives of our customers. And in April or May, there was some new research that came out that said very clearly that brands that embrace innovation and agility with an aim on humanizing the customer's experience will outperform their peers. And so it was just shortly after that we started to see the first impact of that kind of belief. And it had to do with the fact that corporations were now starting to position themselves as being more caring. So we're here to help. We'll get through this together. We're here for you. As individuals, families, and businesses, we're here. Yay! So everybody's here for us. And so you can imagine my optimism being in the customer service, because we've known that this is a critical element of building customer loyalty for a very long time. And no matter what the industry was, we were seeing this type of advertising hit our television screens. But then when we started to look at how we were following through on these commitments, there were some other barriers that hit us. Markets fell, revenues were down, budgets were trimmed, people had to be laid off, companies were struggling to keep their employees safe, and so service struggled, supply chains broke down. And so it left us with a situation where there was really good intent, but the follow-through is suffering. And so the first thing that I want you to do, using your chat function, is when you think about your own organizations, do you believe that your organizations and all the touch points and all the people that serve them, are they truly empathetic to what people are going through? And so because I'm sharing my screen, Penny, can I ask you, if you don't mind, to give me a sense of what's coming in?
Absolutely. Sarah's saying no, they aren't at all. Josephine shared, of course not, desensitizing is very real. Shonda's saying no. Amy's saying, I think so. So we've got a mixture, but I think there's a gap. Some are, some aren't. Some are resistant. Others are embracing it.
Yeah, I think people are really struggling with how to actually demonstrate it. And so we're going to cover some of that in today's presentation.
Yeah, and one more comment. Sylvia said, I think this is a great one, not fully empathetic because some are still grasping how to deal with their own personal issues. And I think that's a great.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's really important. There is no question that we must do better, and we must become much more empathetic. Being customer-centric is no longer just a catchphrase. It's going to be a way of doing business. It's going to be a business imperative. And so demonstrating empathy at each point of contact lets customers know that we're serious about it. So we're going to talk about that in much greater detail. So before we go too far, I want to make sure that we're fully understanding what empathy is, because there's so many misconceptions and everyone has their own definitions about it. So put simply, it's a situation where we're able to put ourselves in someone else's situation and be able to say with confidence, I can relate to what you're feeling. We often talk about this as walking a mile in someone else's shoes, and so we've got that. That's why it's called this particular presentation. But to have empathy is not just to understand the facts about what someone's feeling, but also their feelings about it. So the emotion that's attached to it. And when it comes with COVID, those feelings are shared by all of us. And so we have that ability to be able to truly say, I can understand what you're going through. However, you don't need to actually have had that the same experience as a customer to be empathetic. You just need to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and say, I can understand how and why you feel the way you do, and because of that, I'm going to treat you and do for you what I would do for myself. So what would I do in your situation? The other important thing is we often think about empathy as it relates to negative emotions like frustration, anger, disappointment, fear, sadness, suspicion. But more importantly, there are positive emotions that we can address as well. Whenever we deal with bring empathy into a conversation related to frustration, for example, it calms the conversation down, and it allows us to makes it easier for us to gain control of the call. When we're dealing with positive emotions, however, it's about connecting with happiness, joy, excitement, or relief. And when we share those emotions and empathize with someone in that situation, we share with them in the pride, joy, and excitement. And the caller is going to feel befriended and appreciated and supported. And that's going to be able to build a much greater relationship with the customer. Now, it's also important to be clear about the difference between empathy and sympathy, because they're often confused for one another. And although they do relate to one another, they are very different. When you understand someone else's situation as if they were your own, you are expressing empathy. Empathy is a shared experience. Sympathy, on the other hand, is all about you. When you sympathize with someone, you're not attempting to relate or understand their feelings. In fact, sometimes you don't even connect with them at that level. So it's important to think about sympathy, and particularly this kind of an apology, in a very different way, because customers have heard this kind of I'm sorry so often that they are no longer registering it. So I'm sorry for the inconvenience doesn't register with people anymore. However, when we tag sympathy together with empathy, it becomes much more powerful. So I'm sorry that happened to you. I can imagine how frustrating that must be. Just brings much more power and personal connection and engagement to the caller. So we know what empathy is. We know what the difference is between empathy and sympathy. And so the big question is, how empathetic are you? So we're going to try a little test here, and I want you to just concentrate as hard as you can on this image. Okay, so let's see how well you do. Just concentrate on this image. Okay. So how did you do? Did anyone yawn while they were watching this?
I did. Let's see what happened to the group here. Someone said, anybody else yawning?
You didn't yawn. Oh dear.
I did. So many responses are coming in. They're scrolling.
Yeah, I can actually see them now, so that's good.
Oh, okay. Good.
Yeah.
So some did, some didn't.
I'm going to change my screen sharing if that's okay.
Sure. Some said, I need coffee now. I was concentrating too hard on the image. Too much caffeine, I guess.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. So research tells us that yawning is contagious. And so when you see people yawning, you may find yourself yawning as well. I think, Penny, you were saying you saw your dog yawning yesterday and you started yawning. So the more empathetic you are, the more likely you would be affected by these images. And I would encourage you, there's lots of great online questionnaires that you can go through that will identify whether, how empathetic you are naturally. So if you're feeling the need to yawn right now, then you tend to be good at reading other people's emotions. The really good news is that empathy can be learned. And a lot of people say you're either empathetic or you're not. Well, unless you're a psychopath, everyone can learn to be more empathetic. But like anything worth doing, it needs practice, and it needs practice consistently every day. So as I mentioned earlier, we've been listening to calls for over 18 years now, and we've noticed a trend that I think you may have as well. And that is that while call volume has been declining with the introduction of more self-serve options, when customers finally reach the contact center, their emotions are heightened. And that makes sense. Their problem is so challenging that self-serve can't accommodate them, or they've tried unsuccessfully to solve a problem online and they haven't been able to handle it. So whatever the reason is, we're finding more customers are arriving at the contact center noticeably upset and frustrated. And is that something that you're seeing as well in your center? Just let's see what people think about that.
Yeah, go ahead and chat that in. But I know that just in discussions in previous sessions through the conference this week, that's exactly what we're seeing as the, more AI and the robots and self-serve have taken away the easy calls. When people do come, it's because they can't serve themselves, so they may be at that point. Their emotions a little bit heightened, a little bit angrier, a little bit more frustrated, a little bit more upset. So I think that's definitely the case. I see it over and over again.
Yeah, and I saw other people would agree with you on that as well.
Yeah, we're getting lots of yeses there. If anything, they're disgusted because they wanted a human being in the first place.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're getting a lot of yeses on that one.
Yeah, and so that's why it's very important when you think about the role of the contact center that you see this as a major responsibility, and that is to manage customer emotions. So from our analysis, we know that customers who can hear that you relate to their situation, empathize, and act accordingly end up in a better frame of mind by the end of the call. It's true for all customers, but the impact of empathy is even greater when a caller is upset. And so what happens when you pay attention to empathy? Well, these are results from a major financial institution a few years ago. On month 1, we started out with 3 business units where we had a concerted effort to express genuine empathy on every call. And that involved training, coaching, quality monitoring. And you can see then, after quite a bit of success, these are their net promoter results. We then took a small group and we rolled out the same program to over more than 3,000 agents, both onshore and offshore, and we saw tremendous results in very short order. So the question then is, if empathy is so important and so powerful, why don't we hear it more often in our contact centers? So here's another question for you. These are some of the reasons why we've uncovered as to why agents don't express empathy. When you think about your own contact center, which of these resonate most with you? And I'll just give you a moment to tweet that out, chat it out.
Yeah, while we're waiting on the chats to come in, I think, maybe another one is sometimes they feel like they don't have time for centers that are so focused on, the average handle time of a call. Sometimes they feel like I don't have time to do this. But I think we're seeing companies relax those metrics a little bit now and focus on handling the call the way it should be handled and less about the handle time and those metrics.
Yeah, here, someone said they focus too much on process, and that's really common. They're so concerned about solving the problem that they jump right ahead to the solution. Yeah, so I've heard kind of a wide variety of these issues. Burnout, not knowing how to re-engage. I mean, those are all really valuable insights. So I'm going to go through some of these and give you some sense as to how to coach to each of these kinds of characteristics. Empathy fatigue, that's a good one as well. So the first thing that I'm going to focus in on is this whole idea that agents don't know how. And it's not that they don't know how. They may know how intellectually, but they don't know how to put it into practice. And so what we've done is we've broke it down into really small steps. These need to happen very quickly, however. So the key here is to understand that empathy, the whole act of expressing empathy, is quite a complex skill. So let's go through this and see how you feel about it. The first skill is they have to be able to hear the opportunity to introduce empathy. And that means listening to clues in the caller's statements, their tone of voice, and their manner, and look for the clues that tell us that there is an opportunity to acknowledge and express empathy. Some are very clear and some are harder to identify. If you have an agent who's struggling to deliver empathy, it could very well be that they simply aren't recognizing the clues. So now we're going to try something never before done on any virtual webcast that I've seen, and that is Penny and I are going to reenact a call using Barbara from ANZ Bank as our agent. If you haven't done this already, some of you probably aren't old enough to remember this, but there was a series of really fantastic commercials from ANZ Bank that highlighted Barbara. So go onto YouTube after this video, or after this webcast, and check out Barbara from ANZ World, and you'll get a sense of those great commercials. So what we're going to do is we're going to reenact a call. And what I'd like you to do is, as you are listening to the call, chat with us when you hear opportunities to express empathy. Okay? So let's see how this goes. Okay, Penny? Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
You think I have a hang of it.
Okay.
Hello, hello.
Yeah, hold on. Okay, so now I'm busy, and so let's not waste any more of my time.
But I've been waiting in queue here for over an hour.
Yeah, whatever.
Well, I called last month, and you said I should open up this no-fee account because it had no monthly fees.
No need to thank me.
I'm not thanking you. I got my statement, and there's over $100 in service fees.
Right. Well, you see, when we say no monthly fees, that's no with a silent K, which means you may not know about the fees until the fees are charged. Your mistake.
Hey, if I'd known there were fees, I wouldn't have opened up the account in the first place.
Well, look, to avoid any further confusion on your part, let me make myself 100% clear. We prefer that no customers may know about what we know about what fees are being charged, so we know it's too late for them to say no.
I did not understand a word of what you just said.
Oh, listen, lady, because you're a very valuable client,
Well, the reason...
I'm going to sign you up for something you haven't even asked for.
You can't do that.
It's already in the system.
Well, then I want to make a complaint.
Not my department. How about I transfer you to an automated service that will promise to get back to you?
Well, what I'd really like to do is speak to your supervisor.
Well, that would be me. But I'm servicing a customer right now. Please call back later.
But.
Yay! Penny! Okay. Great job, Penny. Exactly.
Barbara, the agent from Ames Bank World.
That's right. That's right. So it's a compilation of really bad calls that we've heard and some really bad experiences. But did you hear opportunities to express empathy as we were going through that? I'm sure because there were lots of them. Yes. Yes, everyone's saying yes. Okay. So we know that there were lots of opportunities there. Now, although my team will tell you there's an opportunity to interject a little or a lot of empathy into every call, there are going to be situations where it may not add any value to the conversation. So I'd like to just be clear about that as well. So problem-solving calls, by their very nature, tend to come with some sort of emotion, whether it's frustration, anger, or confusion. And these types of calls offer lots of opportunity to express empathy. When a customer explains their problem up front, we have an opportunity to let them know right away that we understand what they're feeling. Okay, so that's pretty clear. And then we have those customers that are engaged. They're wonderful, engaged callers who want to share their good news and connect with us. And when they do, we have the opportunity to let them know that we share in their excitement by expressing empathy. And I think, Penny, you had a really great example from Holland America that you mentioned.
Yeah, we worked with them years ago, and they were just a little concerned that their folks weren't engaging with the caller. So someone, and your example, the reason I mentioned it to you is exactly this example, calling in saying, hey, we're thinking about booking a cruise to Alaska. It's our 50th wedding anniversary. And the reps would say, what are your planned dates of travel?
Exactly.
Oh my gosh, 50 years. Congratulations. That's so exciting. Let's plan you the perfect anniversary trip. Mm-hmm. So it was one of those opportunities to engage, but instead we went straight to the interaction. So exactly what you mentioned here.
And, there's risk in that. It's not just the added value of being engaging with the caller. If you don't engage with them, when they bring this up as a really exciting news for them, and you go right into the transaction, it actually comes across as dismissive and can be even a little embarrassing for the caller. And so it's important when we talk about empathy that we include both the positive and the negative emotions that customers are bringing to the call with them. And then we have those straightforward day-to-day requests. And what needs to be done is routine and predictable. Now, customer emotions in this case are generally neutral. And it's something that needs to be done and be done right, but it isn't emotionally charged. And so the question is, do you need to introduce empathy into these types of calls? Well, customers, what they want most in these calls is efficiency. There's no need to express emotion up front. However, if you can, it helps with engagement. But the key is to don't forget about it and listen for clues as the call progresses so that you can find opportunities to engage in a more empathetic way. Now, once you hear the opportunity to express empathy, the next step is to name it. And most experienced agents will do that sort of spontaneously. But it does mean that for inexperienced agents, it's important that you remind them of this step, and it's a really good sort of launching point. So by focusing on the customer's emotions and how they're feeling, it also helps to direct attention away from how the agent is feeling. So if they're conscious about looking for clues about how the customer is feeling, they'll be less likely to worry about how they're feeling. And that's really what we want to try to create here. So we've named the emotion, and now it's time to reflect back what we've heard to let the customer know that we've empathized. And all of this has to happen in a matter of seconds. Because responding to emotional clues that you hear at the end of the call is going to do nothing to help you engage the customer. In fact, it's not going to help you manage the call and help to calm down the situation. Instead, you need to be able to offer empathy at the first available opportunity. And typically that happens within the first 10 seconds of a call. As soon as someone expresses what their need is, there's an opportunity to express empathy. So if the name we gave to the emotion in this example is disappointed, then we can use that as a jumping off point to bridge into empathy. And this is where most agents struggle. They just don't know where to start. So if the emotion is disappointed, then you can simply say, I can understand why you would be disappointed. Or it makes sense that you would be feeling disappointed. We're letting the customer know that we empathize with them and we're really validating their emotion. If they're excited, we can say, I can understand why you would be excited. I can hear that you're excited. That's a real achievement. So again, weaving in that emotion into the empathy statement. And remember, always remember to balance both the excitement and the problem-solving sides of empathy. So we've covered hearing it, name it, and reflect it, so that all happens very quickly. But you can do that, but if you don't combine it with own it, action, taking action and ownership for the problem, then you might as well not even worry about expressing empathy, because empathy without ownership is just lip service. So this is how it would work. If someone is concerned, as in this example, which is what you've heard, you let the customer know that you hear them by empathizing, and then you follow up with an ownership statement. So that's not good. I can understand why you'd be concerned. Let me see what's happened. They're disappointed. I name it and reflect it back to the customer, and then I own the problem. We call it also a can-do. So I may not be able to get you that item, but I know you want that, and I'm going to do everything I can do to help. So really what we're trying to do here is combine an empathy statement with ownership as well. So there's another consideration, and that has to do with the fact that empathy works differently for B2B than it does for B2C. customers or consumers respond more readily to empathy. They need to know that you understand them and their needs, whereas in a business relationship, they're typically calling because they want a problem solved. It's not personal, and so it may not be emotionally charged and they may not be invested in the outcome. Now, while it's still important, it doesn't play as critical a role. And so if you've got a B2B environment, you may not find the need to introduce empathy as often as if you're working in a consumer-oriented environment. Now, the second tip has to do with how we deliver it, our tone of voice. And that has to do with sounding genuinely empathetic. Now, we've had a lot of debate about this over the years, and some people say that you need to be empathetic. Well, it's not actually that we want people to be authentically empathetic. In fact, it's unrealistic to think that they will be authentically empathetic. If they are empathizing with every single customer, then they're going to burn out in no time. And that's why it's so important to work with agents to develop the language of empathy so they keep their own emotions in check and focus on sounding genuinely empathetic. That doesn't mean being fake or phony. It just means that they've got to distance themselves from the empathy so they can respond appropriately, so to keep their own emotion out of the equation. So hear it, name it, reflect it, own it. As you work through these different steps, you'll find that they're going to become much more comfortable in identifying the opportunities to express empathy, and then to come up with a model or a way of bridging to express empathy. And of course, never forget to introduce ownership. So the other reason that they don't express empathy is they've forgotten, and so of course you want to remind them. And they can remind it through coaching or training, refresh their learning. But the most important thing with agents is to make it a routine, and so that means making sure that it's included in all of their coaching and their QA activity. So the other reason that agents aren't expressing empathy, or so people say, is that they aren't naturally empathetic. And so I want to move into another barrier and address this head on. We all have agents that are not naturally empathetic. In fact, we may all have children that aren't naturally empathetic. The reality is that since the mid-'60s, our call centers have been staffed primarily by boomers and Gen X, but now it's the millennials. And so before I go any further and talk about millennials, do we have any millennials on the call with us today? No millennials? Yes, me. Okay.
I was going to say, I bet out there, yeah.
Yeah, good. Well, then you'll find this very interesting because millennials will dominate our labor force in general and certainly our call centers for years to come. And so it begs the question, are millennials naturally empathetic? Now, you may have read or heard about an article that was published in Time magazine in 2012 that concluded that millennials have a stronger sense of entitlement than other groups currently in the workforce, and they tend to be more narcissistic. In fact, 58% more college students scored higher on a narcissism scale in 2009 than in 1982. So it stands to reason that with these kind of statistics that we would not see a lot of empathy within the millennials. And a lot of people were talking about that. But in fact, that's not at all what we're seeing. While millennials may not be naturally empathetic, they have something else that is equally important, and that is that they're nice. Millennials are more accepting of differences, not just among gays, women, and minorities, but in everyone. And this makes millennials very coachable when it comes to empathy. So we know that the possibility, empathy can be learned. And so that brings us to the next one. Someone said their agents were uncomfortable. And that's for sure, we see that all the time. They find expressing empathy feels awkward. It makes them feel like they're being overly intrusive or inappropriate. And this is particularly true with offshore agents. They may know what empathy is intellectually, but they simply feel uncomfortable and at risk emotionally introducing it themselves. They feel that somehow they're putting themselves at risk. So the key here is to build empathy into every call so it becomes routine. So just like you're answering the phone with a standard greeting, a simple phrase like, "I hear your concern," is even a good starting point for introducing empathy. And then we come into the one that we all struggle with, and that agents know how to do it, they simply don't want to. And that's true. Some agents are slow to change, and others are contrary and push back, and we all know who those are. And there are others, someone mentioned this earlier, where they simply don't have time, effort, or the energy just isn't worth it to them. They don't want to engage. But the main reason we find is that agents, they emotionally are shut down because of a situation that they're in. And we did some analysis on that, and what we found is if a customer was pleasant, they were more likely to introduce empathy. But if a customer was upset or frustrated, using a louder tone of voice or becoming much more animated, angry, or yelling, they found it very difficult to introduce empathy. And so the key here is to make agents aware that this can happen and to teach them how to effectively manage their own emotions while working to turn around an upset caller. So true empathy involves using our feelings to understand the feelings of someone else. And if you have an angry customer is complaining because someone didn't call them back, you can understand why they would feel that way, and you might even be able to imagine yourself waiting impatiently for a call back without becoming angry or frustrated yourself. The key is to take an intellectual leap and think of yourself in someone else's situation without taking on the emotional baggage associated with it. Okay, so we've learned a lot, and this is a lot of information to grasp, but I really want to move on to what are the 6 things you can do now to improve empathy in your own environment. The first is to have a coaching plan. And I know you've heard a lot about coaching. And the key here is to have frequent touch points, coaching, and feedback related to empathy. And really what you're working for is consistency. If you have consistency, then that will carry you forward. And so you just need to plan to do it. And with anything, it just takes practice. And as you gauge and build better relationships with your customers, it'll start to show that it's paying off, and so people will want to engage more readily. The second has to do with training, and how you deliver it matters. Yes, you could deliver it in a classroom instruction or via webcast. That's great. However, empathy is a complex skill, and it's difficult to learn. And so giving agents the ability to develop this at their own pace is important, and e-learning particularly aligns itself well to that kind of environment. It also means that you can track progress and test comprehension. Whatever training you develop, make sure that you can also use it to refresh and reinforce skills. So don't develop it just for new hire training. Make sure it's able to be used for remedial training as well. And that means it needs to be short and concise. And the other thing that I feel is very important as it relates to empathy is that it should be customized for your environment. And VeriQuest has an empathy program that is available for customization, and there are others that are available as well. But the reason that customization is important is that empathy in a healthcare setting is very different from that in a storage company. is very different, again, from a bank, is very different from a credit collections environment. So you need to make sure the examples are relevant. Now, if you don't have a budget, which many people don't, then there is an alternative, and that is this great video that's on YouTube, and this is in the handout. Brene Brown has a great little cartoon video about empathy. Take a look at it, have your team go through it, and then do some role-playing. And role-playing is great to close the gap in whether you're only learning or not, between theoretical and real life. And so what you want to do is to create a safe practice environment where they're practicing expressing empathy with you and not with customers, with real customers. I'm a big proponent of role-playing. The other thing is to make sure that you role-play scenarios where empathy is essential. And make sure you also look at it across all your channels, because it's not just in voice, it's also with email and chat is also critical to make sure that you understand how to introduce empathy. And then, of course, quality assurance. Add it to your QA criteria if you haven't already done so. Document it well. In the handout, I've got some examples about how to document it. Make sure that you're clear about what the customer's experience is going to be like and what the best practice that you're looking for looks like as well. And then if you haven't done this already, do this, and that is develop a best practice library and start collecting up really great examples of empathy from your team. I'm learning an awful lot about peer coaching, and it's a tricky area, but if you've got an agent that's particularly good expressing empathy, team them up with others that may not be as good and help them support each other. That's particularly important if you've got a lot of work-at-home agents and they may feel a little isolated, or you may just not have enough time to do all the coaching that's required. And actually, this is number 7. And that is make sure you're demonstrating empathy in your everyday life. Lead by example. It's important to be expressing empathy in these times, always, but more importantly in these times with your friends, the family, your customers, each other. Encourage people to use that empathy muscle wherever possible. And, I think when you find that you're actively engaging and using empathy with everyone around you, it will naturally flow through to the customers that you serve. Empathy is not an initiative. It's not a project. It's not a pilot. In our world, empathy needs to be ingrained in everything we do, in our businesses and how we interact with our customers and each other. And so it's my hope that we all work to help companies keep the promises they made to us during these difficult times and for many years to come, and to truly be there for our customers and for each other. And we'll get through whatever difficulty comes our way together. So that's it. Thank you so much for the time today.
Okay. Just a couple, and we'll give our audience opportunity to ask you some questions, Sharon, as we wrap up. But I had a couple of thoughts along the way. I think you mentioned at one point about how there's this opportunity not 2 or 3 minutes into the call to express empathy, but it's typically up front. If we can train our agents to recognize that emotion and grab it up front. And a client that I worked with years ago, we were doing this, and there was a big issue about expressing empathy and kind of getting on board with either I'm anxious, I'm scared, I'm upset, or I'm excited, or whatever. And that company, it was really focused on just customer engagement up front. And they had these engagement parties. But what they did, and I thought this was really, really good, was they had a 30-30-30 plan. And for 30 days, they were going to listen to and judge a call a day. So 30 calls over 30 days. And they were only going to listen to the first 30 seconds of the call. So you got a yes or no on the first 30 seconds. and their reps began to really start paying attention early on in the call, what was going on, and using that first 30 seconds to engage. And that so directed the rest of the call, it paid off for them in terms of this is an organization that was doing selling, so we want to engage first before you can begin to position and sort of sell. But that little, and it just helped them focus on pay attention, in that early part and relate back. And it really worked for them, and the agents found that they really became fluent in that new skill by practicing and really paying attention to it, to the point where they didn't have to pay such attention to it anymore. It became more ingrained. And so they might have been naturally empathetic to start, but many of them became that way. And in talking with them several months later, some of these reps where we've done some training, said that it really did kind of fall over into other areas of their life. And they used it not just on the phones with in the call center, but in other areas of life. As you said, it's not just a call center skill, it's a life skill we should all have and think about more.
Yeah, that's a great example. We often talk about creating great first impressions, and it does include expressing empathy within that first 15 seconds of the call. So as soon as someone expresses what their needs are, you have the ability to provide them with ownership, use their name, and express empathy all in that very short period of time. So that tends to be what people are looking for these days.
Yeah, they're wanting someone to empathize, take ownership, and that person will then relax a little bit. They know they're in good care, I think.
Yes.
And I think we need to be spending particular attention to it, obviously, these days. So we have a few comments, Sharon. So here's one from Josephine. I find when we link the empathy statement to the reason why they are feeling that way really helps. Like Mary, I know how frustrated you are not getting speeds expected to get. Let's figure out what's happening, see if we can make things better for you. And I think
great.
The let's word, let's you and me figure this out, that is another word I think that inspires confidence and is another good trigger word, I think. And here's another comment. Tomia said, for agents who struggle with giving empathy, is sympathy a good stepping stone, or does it develop bad habits? What do you think of that?
Well, we try not to express sympathy because sympathy is all about me and not about the customer, as I said earlier. So I think the key is if you can get them to provide something as an interim. If you want an interim statement, it would probably be, I can understand why you would feel that way, is a good way to kind of create a bridge. Typically what we find is that agents come up with their own empathy statement that they are most comfortable with, and then they modify it for different customers. So that's, come up with something that you feel comfortable with, that you can use more readily, but the key is to get it consistently ingrained. Yeah.
I like that you mentioned, too, that this also needs to be addressed. It's not just on the phone, but in our other communications. So
yes.
Emails and chats, maybe, I don't know, is there the same level of a situation needing empathy? I think maybe we think about that less. It's like, it's just a quick transaction email or a chat. If I've really got a problem, I really say I'm going to call and talk to them. But so that kind of that's interesting. I don't see
a lot of
in written communications. Yeah.
A lot of people are using email simply because they want a written transcript of the interaction. So if it's a serious problem, they may use email. And so you do need to have that ability to interject that into the conversation. Yeah. And obviously with chat, if someone's having trouble with logging in, you want them to, you want to continue to engage them that way. Mm-hmm.
And here's something for Rashonda. How to coach agents when they display empathy, but the customer isn't receptive. We've had situations where the customer says, no, you don't understand.
Yeah, that's a good one, and that comes with saying that sort of root response. I can understand, or I understand. Saying I understand is not an empathy statement unto itself, and so typically that creates a response like you've seen. If they were to say I understand how frustrating this must be for you, or I understand that this has been difficult, then I think you might warrant a different kind of response. The customer would respond differently.
Yeah, I think you're right there. Or let's get some more information so you can help me better understand. At least there. Okay.
Yeah, remember that empathy always needs to be followed up with an action statement. So you empathize, I empathize with you, and this is what I'm going to do for you. So empathy and ownership really work together.
Very good. Very good. Okay, I think I don't see any more questions coming in. Well, I think this was just fabulous, Sharon.
Thank you, Penny.
I think it's such a needed thing. I think in today's world, we can get the transaction done, but in the end, they're not going to remember that. They're going to remember how they were treated, I think. And
exactly.
We can all be more cognizant of that, not just on the phone, but I think in our everyday interactions and in lives, that would be a good thing. So we can all take home a lesson from this today, not just something we're going to pass along to our call center agents, but for all of us as human beings. I think this was a good lesson today, and I think a fantastic way to end the week. So
great.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming and doing this for us. She's so well known and such an expert, and we were just delighted to have her here with us at QATC this week. So, Sharon, thank you again, and thanks to all our participants. You guys had great questions, great interaction this afternoon. I know it's Friday afternoon. You're trying to wrap up your week, perhaps. Yeah. Gosh, there's so many of you here and interacting so well. So thank you so much. You were a really good group today. We really appreciate that.
And for all you Canadians on, happy Thanksgiving.
I meant to do that. Yeah, so happy Thanksgiving, Canadians. That's great. All right, one more reminder, if you would go out to the app and fill out the session evaluation. Sharon, I'm sure this is going to get all fives. I thought it was fabulous. So, thanks very much. Thanks to our audience today. Everyone have a great rest of the day and a great weekend, and we'll see you back next week at QATC for more great sessions. So have a great weekend, everybody.
I'll be there. Okay, bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Thanks, Penny.